My apartment was robbed once and then broken into a couple of months later. And that's not even the crazy or spooky part. I had just moved in and I got very, very sick. And I actually had to go stay with my parents while getting treatment at the hospital. No one had even been to my new place or knew the address. It was full of unpacked boxes that I was too ill to move in properly. Whoever broke in, they left the TV, they left the jar of cash on the dresser, and they only took my diaries, multiple diaries, and I always buy the same kind, and they date back for years and years. Each of them were packed into different boxes too. Someone had rifled through my stuff, found those diaries, and only took them. They even left my DIY and recipe books, which were the same style as those diaries, so they had to have checked each individual one. This apartment was on the 3rd floor. There was no sign of a break-in, but there was small handles on the outside of the pillars of the porch that went all the way to the ground. Thinking maybe, perhaps they climbed, but I don't know. The second occurrence, when I knew something weird was happening and that someone had been in my apartment, I returned home one night to find the light outside of my door was off. In the moment, I didn't really think much of it, except that I need to call and get it replaced. I unlocked and opened up my door and tried to turn on the light. Nothing. I thought maybe the power had gone out, but then I looked and saw my microwave still had the correct time on it. Something about that spooked me, and I went over and called the on-call agent for our apartment complex. He came over and I waited outside. He came out a few minutes later and told me to immediately call the police. Turns out, nothing had been taken, but every single light bulb in my apartment had been unscrewed just enough so that the lights wouldn't turn on. The cops came and checked it out, found nothing suspicious, but told me to stay somewhere else for the night. The next day, after telling my sister what happened, her and her boyfriend drove from 3 hours away and installed deadbolts. It was against the complex's policy, but the management was just as creeped out as I was. Thankfully, nothing else creepy happened in the 2 years that I lived there. My family and I used to live in a very rough neighborhood when I was a kid, around 7 years old. One night, it was just my mom, me, and my 2 siblings at home. My dad was on a business trip. Around midnight that night, someone began to knock on our door. My mom woke up, went to the front door and asked who it was. No answer. She thought maybe it was some kids playing ding dong ditch or something, so she just casually didn't think much of it and went back to bed. About 30 minutes later, someone began to knock again. This time, she got up and peered through the side window to see if she could catch anyone out there, but there was nobody there. She starts to worry, goes back to the room, grabs my dad's shotgun, and sits in the living room in the dark, just waiting. Sure enough, a few moments later, someone began knocking again. This time, my mom shouts at whoever it is that she's going to call the cops, and if anyone tries to come inside, she would shoot them. Again, no response. My mom phoned the police, and around 2 a.m., they finally show up and do a quick search of the outside of our house while we all waited on the inside. After their search, they tell my mom that they'd found a piece of barbed wire about 4 feet long next to the front door, and they asked if it belonged to us. My mom told them that it wasn't hers and asked why. The police officer told her that it had to belong to whoever was knocking on the door then. He also told her he thinks that they were planning on strangling my mom with that barbed wire when she opened up the door to see who was knocking. Told her she was very smart to not open the door to see who's out there, otherwise it could have costed her life. They said they'd patrol the neighborhood until morning and do a thorough investigation once there was daylight outside. That next morning, as they were searching around the house, Found footprints leading to the back of the house and leading up to my bedroom window. They'd also found nicks in the window sill, where they were trying to pry it open and break in but had failed. Not long after that, we moved out of that house. This incident happened about 5 years ago. This is a story that I never really tell anymore, because most people are either uncomfortable hearing it or make well-meaning comments about what I should have done in this situation, without really understanding how differently your mind works when you're experiencing absolute panic. So here's my story. I was living in a relatively nice apartment in downtown Memphis, working as an ophthalmic technician. I arrived home from work at my usual time, which was around 4:30 p.m., unlocked my door, and went inside. I set my phone, wallet, and keys on the kitchen island, hearing my heavy metal front door swing shut loudly behind me, and began taking care of some errands around the house. Having grown up in a small town, it was habitual for me to not lock my door during the day, especially when I knew my husband would be home soon anyway. I've never forgotten to lock my door once in 5 years since this day. I walked through my bathroom and into my large walk-in closet and began hanging up the laundry that I'd started earlier in the day before I left for work. My front door opened, and I smiled with surprise. My husband was home a little early, and I happily called out to him, "I'm in here, love." I was met with silence, and slowly began to feel that sinking feeling of something is wrong crawl up my spine. I tried to shake it off, thinking my husband simply hadn't heard me, and walked out of my living room kitchen area. Standing on the other side of my kitchen island was a complete stranger. He was male, older than me, I would estimate in his 50s, just standing there staring at me. No ski mask, no weapon, just watching me. I wondered if he'd maybe walked into the wrong apartment and was going to apologize and leave. But as he continued to stare, I realized that I needed to do something other than just gape at the stranger inside my house. I stood tall, puffed out my chest in an attempt to look more threatening, which is hard to do as a small female, but used a loud, clear voice, telling him to get out of my apartment, that he had no business being here. He completely ignored me, like I hadn't even spoken. Then began to pick up my things, my cell phone, my keys, my wallet. He picked them up methodically and put them into his own pockets. And that's when it hit me that this person is truly dangerous. I was naive enough to believe this was all a mistake until that moment. I darted forward toward the only other device that I had that would allow me to get help, my computer. I had to take a few steps closer to the intruder in order to reach it, but I still had 12 to 15 feet between us, so I knew I could grab it and run before he could reach me. As I picked it up and turned to run, I saw him start to move after me. I sprinted back toward the bathroom because it was the only place I could go and put two locked doors between us, my bathroom door and the closet door. I slammed and locked the first door, and within seconds, I could hear him messing with it, trying to open it. I ran into the closet and locked that door too, opening my computer and getting on Facebook Messenger to contact my husband. I sent message after message, pleading with him to call 911 and tell them that there was an intruder in our apartment. He got the messages within minutes and assured me that he had a dispatcher on the phone and he was leaving work himself to try and get to me if he could. I waited and waited. The bathroom door opened and the intruder came inside. He moved to the closet door and started to break down that door too. Here's the part where people usually start giving me advice on how I should have acted, but all I can tell you is that I was frozen in the moments. With fear and shock, I don't know, but I didn't scream or cry or search for a weapon in that dark closet. I didn't brace the door or try to hold it closed. I just kneeled in my closet and waited to die, because that's what I thought was going to happen. People also like to tell me that I lived in an apartment. Surely if I'd screamed, someone would have heard and come help. Surely there was something heavy enough in my closet to use to defend myself. Hell, even the laptop I had would hurt someone if I swung it at him. Why didn't I do anything? I don't really have an answer for that, but the closet door miraculously held. I heard frustrated footsteps go back into the living area of my apartment. I heard things breaking, bottles shattering, my drawers and refrigerator cabinets being flung open, and things were torn out of them. I continued to sit in that closet, silently crying and waiting to leave, feeling that death was inevitable. I feel awful about my selfishness in the moment, and I messaged my mom, who lived a 15-hour drive away, and told her what was happening as well. I desperately wanted comfort, and to tell her how much I loved her. I'm not a parent, but I can only imagine the fear and helplessness I put her in, knowing that her daughter was in danger and there was nothing she could do to help. She messaged me back constantly, begging me to keep replying. I told her I would as long as I could, but I also told her to tell my brothers that I loved them and to help my husband through whatever happened next if it ended badly for me. The intruder came back and started messing with the closet door again, mumbling disjointed words that I couldn't really distinguish. I remember hoping that the police would get to the apartment before my husband, that he wouldn't be the one to find me in whatever state this invader left me in. The front door opened once more, but this time it was my husband shouting for me. The intruder walked out toward the living room kitchen area again, and I opened up the door and darted from the closet to find my husband on the ground with him, pinning him in place. The man kept mumbling and at times yelling, but never really put up much resistance. This entire part is a blur for me. I remember feeling like the room was spinning, filling with fear mostly for my husband at this point. Eventually, the police found the apartment. It took them about 25 minutes to arrive, which still blows my mind. I know that time seems to move slowly during scary situations, so I thought it was less than that. But from the time my husband dialed 911 to the time the officers arrived, it was 25 excruciating minutes. This isn't intended to bash them in any way. It just seemed like an unusually long time for a response to a home invasion. They got my things back from the man and took him out of my apartment. I numbly went through the process of filing a police report and telling them what happened. One of the officers commented that I really should keep my doors locked at all times. I remember feeling like he was being very insensitive or blaming me for what happened. But later, recognized his words were coming from experience. I'm sure he's seen this situation end differently for other women. Within 30 minutes, the scariest incident in my life was over, but I've carried the fear, the violation, and the anxiety of having someone intrude into my space for years. If it happened to me once, it could happen to me again. If this or something similar has happened to you and you're struggling with the aftermath of it, the sleepless nights, the lying awake listening for sounds of forced entry, the nightmares, the constant check and rechecking your locks. This is what eventually helped me. A year after this took place, my husband and I moved to the Midwest for his job. We selected a safe town with a nice apartment complex and chose the third-floor apartment with only one point of entry. I looked up every statistic on crime for that neighborhood, finding only one incident that isolated for a car theft, and it was the only thing reported in decades. I still couldn't sleep at night. It was definitely better than staying in that same apartment in Memphis, but my husband often worked night shift now, and I couldn't simply continue being terrified to sleep at night. I realized my biggest fear wasn't that something could happen again, but that if it did, I was just as unprepared now as I was then. I hadn't changed anything other than locking my doors, and I knew I would likely freeze up again and leave my life up to being able to hide well enough or having a door hold long enough to save me, and that was unacceptable. I walked into a martial arts school with an excellent self-defense program, introduced myself, and started taking classes. At first, I was quiet, hiding in the back of the room and generally keeping to myself. My instructor, who was both incredibly kind and incredibly insightful, slowly built up my confidence and brought me out of my bubble of fear. After several months of training, I finally shared my reason for taking classes with him, and he's worked with me tirelessly to give me the ability to protect myself in any environment. I've been training for years now, and the difference has made in every aspect of my life is unbelievable. The meek, quiet girl that waited to die in her closet does not exist. I'm confident, I'm strong, I'm worthy of living and protecting myself in my home. I'm no longer ashamed of how I handled the situation I was in, but I also understand what steps I can take to ensure that I'm safe. It wasn't easy, and it didn't happen overnight, but it was worth it. I recognize this might not be a solution or option for everyone. Your experience is valid, and however you decide to cope with your own story is the right choice for you. This is how I happen to do it, and it's worked well for me. Thank you again for listening. I'm a little afraid to share this because I'm not sure how people will respond. Maybe doing so will help someone else that's feeling alone with this. If anyone is struggling with their own story and wants a kind ear to listen, I'm here. Stay safe out there.
For almost a year, I didn't do anything but just work and sleep, and my 21st birthday nearly passed without me even realizing it. Fortunately, a friend sent me a text asking what I had planned, and we decided to spend that evening at our favorite club. And that night, we just drank and played pool. A few guys tried to get us back to their place, but I did the smart thing and just went home. When my friend dropped me off, I was in a pretty bad state. I had already barfed once on the way, and I was fighting like crazy not to do it again. I made it about 20 feet before I felt another puke pushing up through my throat, and my neighbor just so happened to be outside smoking and rushed over to help me. He held my hair back as I retched repeatedly for the next few minutes. He walked me to my door and helped me in when I was finished. I passed out in my living room for the next 9 hours. It's not quite the way a girl dreams of meeting her husband, but it was how I met mine. I had just gotten out of the shower when there was a knock at the door. I peeked out the peephole and was my neighbor. I was too embarrassed to face him, but I didn't want to be rude. I yelled out for him to wait a moment and quickly threw on some clothes. When I opened the door, I was kind of surprised. In my drunken state, I hadn't noticed how cute he actually was, and this just made me more self-conscious, and I couldn't even look him in the face. He asked if I was okay, and I said yes. There was a brief moment of uncomfortable silence before he introduced himself as Tyler. I said, "Nice to meet you," and slammed the door behind me. I was being rude, and I knew it, but it was still too soon to really face him. And a few days would pass before I got the courage to knock on his door. I apologized for my behavior and thanked him for his help. He smiled, and my heart melted, and I just feel like I'd fallen in love in that moment. Our relationship moved relatively fast from there. When I wasn't at work and Tyler wasn't at school, we were together. We spent most of our time at his place, and it was much nicer than mine. He comes from a very wealthy family, so all of his stuff was very nice, and that isn't what drew him to me. He's actually a very kind and down-to-earth man, but I'd be lying if I said that I didn't enjoy lounging in leather chairs and sleeping in ultra-soft cotton sheets. I enjoy being pampered just as much as the next woman. What can I say? Tyler has given me all the attention I needed, but there was one reason that I'd sometimes get jealous early on. Tyler's car. He loved that thing almost as much as life itself. I don't know anything about automobiles, but I remember it was made by BMW and had an M on the back. And don't get me wrong, it was a very nice car, but sometimes I thought that he cared more about it than me. Despite my feelings about it, I was happy to see it go the way it did. This was in 2017. We'd been together 9 months when it happened. We spent the evening at his apartment watching movies, and the two of us were curled up together on the couch, and the windows were cracked, letting in the cool night air. Just after 8 p.m., there was a knock at the door. Tyler got up to answer it, and I went into the kitchen to get some more wine. I'd just finished up filling my glass when I heard Tyler call me into the living room, and I still remember the hint of fear in his voice. When I turned the corner, I saw 2 guys with masks over their face, holding him at gunpoint. One of the men waved me over and told me to give him my phone, and I did as I was told. I almost dropped it because I was shaking so bad, and Tyler did the same. Then they demanded his wallet. He gave that over too without any resistance, and I started to speak, and one of the men whispered to me to shut up, and I did. They didn't ask for my money. I'm not sure why. I thought they had what they wanted and were going to leave, but then they demanded the key to the car. The pain on Tyler's face was very clear. He tried to bargain with the thieves, but they had obviously come there with one purpose. No amount of begging and pleading was going to stop them. His stalling was starting to annoy them, and the taller of the pair warned him to not play any games. He reluctantly gave in and walked over to the table where his keys were. He picked them up and walked back over to where we stood. At the last moment, he drew his hand back. The tall man let out a sort of huff and knocked Tyler across the head with his gun. I screamed, and the other guy barked at me to be quiet. I could only stand and watch as Tyler started to pour blood from his head, and the tall guy quickly said, "I warned you. Give me the keys now." And Tyler slowly raised his hand as high enough for the shorter guy to snatch them, and now that they had got what they'd come for, they quietly slipped out the door without a word. The second the door closed, I ran to the bathroom, grabbing a towel. Tyler was just lying on the floor, moaning. I placed the towel on his head, and I asked him to just hold it there while I ran to call 911. At that time, I still had a landline, and I ran across the hall to call for help. Once I was sure an ambulance was coming, I hung up and ran back to be with Tyler. The ambulance arrived within a few minutes and rushed him off to the hospital. Fortunately, he was still awake when he left. I stayed behind to answer questions, and then the cops gave me a ride to the hospital. I waited while they took Tyler for some tests to check for brain swelling and the like, and everything would come back clear, thank God. The doctors kept him overnight for observation, and I stuck around to keep him entertained. We got an Uber back to the apartment later that next day, and I could tell something was just different about him. As we passed the spot where his car was once parked, he stopped and stared for a good minute. He turned and looked at me and said, "What was I thinking? I could have died, all because of a stupid car." Tyler's parents did offer him to buy him a new BMW, but he chose a far less flashy model instead. The robbery had made him scared to own anything like that ever again, and he even stopped wearing his gold Rolex that his mom had bought him for his birthday. And now that he knew people were willing to hurt him or maybe kill him for things like that, they just lost their charm. We decided it was best to try and put the robbery behind us and move on. Even these days, when we're both successful and can afford almost anything, we live a very humble existence. That robbery taught us both something very important. You can have all the money in the world, all the fancy cars and jewelry, but nothing is worth losing your life over.
This is something that happened to a friend and I while home alone. Every time I tell this story, it still shocks everyone in the room. It was the summer of 2021, and I had lived with my mom at the time, who worked as an RN. Mind you, COVID was still rampant at the time, so that meant she had a lot of work to do when it came to treating patients. This resulted in her not being home for a lot of the time, which meant that I'd have the house to myself. One night, my mom was at work as usual, and I had been home alone, bored out of my mind. With nothing to really do, I call up my friend Chris and ask him if he wanted to come over. Now, I wasn't allowed to have anyone over, but being the young and rebellious teen I was, I of course didn't care. Since Chris lived in the next town over, it wasn't long before he arrived. We played basically all of the games I had, from COD all the way to GTA, while eating a bunch of snacks and pizza. As the night progressed, we started watching a few movies and sort of became bored. Not knowing what else to do, Chris recommends that we go upstairs and film some funny videos for YouTube. We didn't really know what to film, so I just started recording Chris doing backflips on the bed, thinking that it was good content. Keep in mind, we were both dumb teens, and this was the type of stuff we got a kick out of. I'd say we filmed each other doing the same thing when we decided to end it there and edit our footage on the computer. At this point, we're uploading the footage to the computer when I noticed something in one of the frames that I found odd. In the upstairs closet next to the bed, I could see something on the door frame. It only took me a few seconds to realize that what I was looking at was a hand wrapped around the closet door. "Chris, do you see that?" I said. As soon as I mentioned it, he had this look of shock on his face and came to the realization that we weren't alone in that room. As frightened as we were, we began to hear footsteps coming down the stairs. I grabbed Chris and whispered that we had to leave through the back door. As we're tiptoeing over to the back door, we see footsteps begin to slowly descend down the stairs. I couldn't tell who it was, but that didn't matter to us. What mattered was leaving the house and ensuring we were safe. Chris and I went out the back door and hid in the shed until we were sure the person was gone. 15 minutes felt like 15 hours as we stayed hidden in the shed waiting for this person to come out. Eventually, however, this person we had seen did end up coming out, and when I saw who it was, I couldn't help but say something. It was a woman in her mid-50s, and I instantly recognized her as my neighbor. I let out a sigh of relief when I saw her and opened the shed to call out to her. However, as I made my presence known, she instantly booked it and ran back to her house. I was confused at first, as I wasn't sure why she was in my house or why she ran. Needless to say, we were both kind of relieved and went back inside to call my mom just to ask her if the neighbor was supposed to come by. There was a short pause before she answered, saying that she had no idea what I was talking about and that she was calling 911. Keep in mind that my mom barely knew my neighbor, so there was no reason she should have been here. 10 minutes go by and I see multiple police cars pull into my neighbor's driveway. I then see her being taken into custody by the police, as well as 2 officers by my door. After I was greeted to the police officers, they then told me that my neighbor actually confessed to breaking into my home to steal my mom's jewelry. She knew my mom wouldn't be home, and I guess she saw it as an opportunity to steal. While this might not have been the scariest thing that's happened to me, it's definitely one I won't forget. My neighbor thankfully gave whatever she stole back and has since been in jail.
This happened when I was 12. I was home alone for one night since my parents were in town with friends. I was in my room around 4:30 a.m. when I was woken up to the sound of knocking coming from the front door. I wasn't going to answer it, but when I looked out the peephole, there wasn't anyone there, shockingly. Then about 10 minutes later, the knocking happened again. I put on my shoes and sweatshirt just in case I needed to get out of the house through the back door. I looked out the peephole again, and I saw a guy who looked to be in his early 50s standing about a yard away, but I didn't get a good view of his face, so I couldn't tell who he was. I even saw a knife tucked into his jeans. Then he took 4 steps towards my house. I freaked out, so I went out the back door as quietly as possible. Don't get me wrong when I say this, but before leaving the house, I didn't put on any pants. Yeah, I know, it's weird, right? But I didn't want to waste any time, but thankfully I was still wearing my tidy whities. Anyway, when I got outside through the back door, I got to the sidewalk and ran for what felt like miles. I was running for about 2 blocks, and I then walked for about 5 more blocks until I finally found a police car. The officer in the car rolled down the passenger window and asked me, "Hey kid, you okay? Why aren't you wearing any pants?" I told him there was a guy at the front door of my house with a knife, and I left to go get help. I told him I didn't have any pants on because I didn't want to waste time and that I was scared for my life. He told me it'll be okay, and then he told me to get into his car so he could drive me home and then take a look at the situation. I got in his car and he drove me. When we got to the house, the officer told me to stay in the car until he got the guy, just for my safety. After about 3 minutes, he came out of my house with the guy in handcuffs. I got out of the car and I went to go see who the guy was that tried to get into my house. I was absolutely shocked when I saw who it was. It was my mom's ex-boyfriend. Apparently, he wanted to come to the house in the middle of the night to slit her throat to get revenge on her for dumping him. But when he saw she wasn't home, he was angry. And I kid you not, that guy with the knife actually told me that I was his other target if she wasn't there. He then said to me,
"You're really lucky you got out of the house in time to get the police. Otherwise, you would have been dead."
The officer put the guy in his car and he came back to me. And I told him how the guy's my mom's ex-boyfriend. He said that he'd call my parents to come over and that he'd tell them about it. I gave him my mom's number, he called her, and then they said they were on their way. About 5 minutes later, my parents came home and the officer told them what happened. Afterwards, I told my parents everything else. They were glad I wasn't hurt, but were also confused about why I left the house while I was still in my underwear. I just told them I was scared for my life and didn't want to waste time. They understood. We thanked the officer, and then he left, and that guy with the knife got taken away. I went in the house with my parents, sat down in the living room, and explained to them a second time the entire story. They were just glad I wasn't hurt or worse. I'm now 23 and I have my own place, and I always make sure my place is locked before leaving for any reason or even going to bed. We haven't heard from my mom's ex-boyfriend since, and we hope it stays that way. I never liked being home alone, especially at night. The creaks and groans of the old house seemed to take on a life of their own, echoing throughout the empty rooms like ghostly whispers. On this particular evening, my parents had gone out for a dinner party, leaving me with the usual instructions to lock up and stay safe. As the clock ticked away, I tried to distract myself with a movie, the soft glow of the TV casting flickering shadows around the living room. The ambience, however, did little to ease the uneasy feeling settling in my stomach. Every small noise made me jump, and the wind outside rattled the windows like a chorus of distant whispers. I decided to retreat to my bedroom, convinced that the comfort of my own space would dispel the growing sense of dread. But as I climbed into bed and pulled the covers tight, an unsettling feeling lingered in the air. Suddenly a chill swept through the room, and I noticed a draft that seemed to come from the hallway. I dismissed it, attributing the sensation to the old house's quirks. Just as I closed my eyes, I heard something soft, almost imperceptible. It was footsteps. My eyes shot open, and I strained to listen. The rhythmic sound echoed throughout the quiet house, each step deliberate and intentional. Panic set in as I realized the footsteps weren't mine. The realization hung heavy in the air, and I lay frozen in bed, my ears tuned to the haunting cadence. Unable to resist, I cautiously slipped out of bed, my bare feet meeting the cold floor. The hallway stretched out before me, dimly lit by the soft glow of the moon filtering through the curtains. The footsteps continued, growing louder with each passing moment. Against my better judgment, I followed the sound, a lump forming in my throat. The steps led me down the corridor and into the heart of the darkness. The air felt charged with an inexplicable energy, and a sense of foreboding washed over me. As I approached the end of the hallway, the footsteps abruptly ceased. The silence that followed was deafening. I stood there trembling, my eyes straining to pierce the shadows. That's when I saw it. A figure, vague and indistinct, standing just beyond the reach of the feeble moonlight. My heart raced and a chill ran down my spine as the figure then turned to face me. Panic consumed me and I stumbled backward, retreating to the safety of my room. I locked the door, my breath shallow and rapid. I called 911, and shortly after I heard sirens and saw the flashing lights. They called my parents, and then what do you know? The police came out of my house with a very skinny and creepy looking guy. They took him away, and I never saw him again after that night. I know a lot of people out there would stay home alone at a very young age due to their parents working night shifts, but in my case, I was never able to stay home alone. One day when I was 15, I thought I was old enough to stay home alone. My parents were going to the store really quick to get some last-minute things for dinner. I was too lazy to go just for a couple of items, and I wanted to stay home and watch a movie that I had recorded on TV. After whining to my mom that they weren't going to be gone for a long time, I convinced her to let me stay. As she was leaving and telling me 1,000 times to make sure the door was locked and to not open the door for anyone, I then rushed into the living room and turned on the TV. Our home has 2 doors. There's a door on the right side where the driveway is, and a door on the left side where the living room is. We don't ever use the left door, and this is something all of our family and friends know. If I ever had a friend coming over, I always made sure they knew to knock on the right side door. Even when we get deliveries, I always leave a side note saying to please use the right door. My family and I make jokes about the left side of our home looking abandoned since we don't use it. My mom focuses on cleaning the right side. Anyway, as I turned on the TV and laid down on the sofa, I suddenly heard a loud knock on the left side door. I paused, thinking maybe it was the TV, but then I heard it again. I turned off the TV and ran towards the hallway. I didn't dare to look out the window. I was scared that it would have been more noticeable. As I was in the hallway, I was peeking towards the door. It felt like I could see how the door vibrated each time the person outside was knocking on the door. I didn't know what to do or who it could be. Everyone I know knows to use the right side door. I was so scared that my legs gave up on me, and I sat down as I looked at the door. The knocking then got even louder. I don't even think it was a knock anymore. It was more like full-on punches. After what felt like hours, it eventually stopped. I sat there crying when I suddenly heard the right side door then open. It was my dad. I looked up at him and I actually felt anger because I thought it was him who was knocking. I was immediately convinced that my parents did this to scare me, but my dad was just genuinely worried and asking why I was crying. I told him what happened, and after he clarified that it wasn't him or my mom who was knocking, he told me that my mom kept saying, "What if something happens to her while she's home alone? How are we going to live with that?" So she apparently made my dad drive back to the house to get me. As I came outside and looked at my mom in the car with a worried look, I started to really wonder if I had made it up. Did the knocking really happen? Or deep down, was I just really scared to actually stay home alone? In the car, I asked my parents if they saw anyone walking as they reached the house, but they said there was no one. It's been 7 years, and to this day, I still wonder if someone was really out there.
"4 years ago, my girlfriend and I bought a house in the suburbs of Central Florida. It was at least 70 years old and was still in pretty good condition for a house that old. It was a nice 2-storied home in somewhat of a quiet residential area with no issues or anything like that. At first it seemed like the perfect house to start our lives in, and that was the case for about a month or so. That was until something happened one day that would forever break me. It was the middle of summer, and my girlfriend had gone to work while I had stayed home sick after going out to a club the other night. I didn't mind it though, as I could use the quiet, and I was trying to get over this illness as fast as possible. Anyway, my girlfriend had gone to work, leaving me to tend to the house. While I did enjoy the quiet, I knew I would miss her as she works in healthcare and would often work long hours. After she left, I rested for a good hour or so and had went downstairs to grab a snack before going back up again. Not knowing what to do, I just put on a movie to keep myself busy in hopes of falling asleep to rest more. At one point during the movie, I heard the tire screech of a car coming from outside. This was weird as there was almost no one that drives recklessly around here, so I could only assume it might have been an accident. I look down from my bedroom window, and parked in my driveway is a white van I've never seen before. At this point, I'm shitting bricks right now, as I wasn't sure who these people were or what they were doing here. Not even a minute later, I hear the frantic knocking on my front door, followed by several people yelling and screaming. I run down to the front door and look through the peephole and see these intimidating men pounding on my door. I speak into my Ring doorbell and ask them who they were and what they were doing on my property. The guy that was closest to the door responded by saying, "Don't play stupid with us. You know who we are, we want our money that you owe, and you're gonna give it to us." At this point, I'm extremely confused and terrified, and I don't want to open the door to confront them. I yell at them that I don't know who they are and to leave. However, this seemed to agitate them even more and began to pound on the door even harder. I knew it was only a matter of time before they would come in here and do God knows what to me. I took that time to call the police and explain everything. Right after I was telling the operator what was going on, I hear my window smash open and see them come in one by one. I knew they'd eventually find me, and so I did the only thing I could do. In the moment, it was risky as hell, but after gathering up the courage, I run down the stairs pleading for them to not kill me. However, instead of them reacting with anger or doing something potentially worse, they all just turned to look at each other with these confused faces. It was then where I could hear sirens from down the road, which was music to my ears. This caused them to get back in their van and flee. They didn't make it far though, as police had managed to find them about 2 blocks away. What police told me they learned shocked me to my core. Apparently, the people who had broken into my house were part of a major drug trafficking operation. One of their buyers had apparently stole $50,000 worth of cocaine and other goods and had smuggled them into their house. Whoever gave these people the address as to where this person might have lived had obviously given them the wrong address, resulting in them breaking into my house. The thought that I could have been killed that day will never leave me. I think the hardest part for me was facing these twisted people in court. I'll never forget them calling my name, walking past these criminals, giving me a look as if they wanted to kill me. My girlfriend and I tried to stay in that house to make the best of it, but it came to the point where we just couldn't. She would become paranoid, and I would often wake up from nightmares about it. It even came to a point where I started having thoughts about how other people from this gang would come back for us. This ultimately started to affect our mental health and even our jobs in a way. I'm not sure why this affected me so much, but we just couldn't live with it. A month later, we made the decision to sell the house and move over 2 states away to a safer area. I hope it stays that way. For context, I'm a female, and this happened just last week when I was in my first semester of college. I attended a community college right near my house, as it was more convenient for me to get to and from school. Anyway, last week I had just gotten home from my first day of classes and threw myself onto my bed to relax. Being at school for long hours was enough to make me exhausted, and sleep was the only thing I was looking forward to. I get some shut-eye for a good hour or so when I woke to my dog Mia barking. This was weird as she almost never barks. I have a dachshund, big bark, small bite, and was the sweetest thing anyone could have, so when I heard her barking, I definitely thought it was strange. I dismissed it as her just barking at someone walking their dog or cat. However, it wasn't until her barks went from annoying to defensive, and that's when I get up to see what she was barking at. I could then see her barking into my parents' bedroom. She has her head up while barking as if she were barking at a person, The only problem was that there wasn't anyone there, even though she clearly knew something was there. At this point, I'm officially creeped the hell out while trying to get her to snap out of it. As I was about to approach her, she squeals back as if she was hurt or scared. I take a look at her and I see this minor gash above her stomach where I then covered it. Thankfully, there wasn't that much blood, but it still hurt her to say the least. I grabbed Mia and ran out of that house so fast to call the police. When my parents got home, I had told them about what had happened prior to them arriving. However, my parents are the type of people to take everything so lightly and lectured me about how I haven't been sleeping well enough and that it was all in my head. I know my story sounds crazy, but I saw it happen. I don't care if my parents believed me or not, as I know what I saw. Nothing has happened since, and my dog has gotten back to her normal self. This is by far the scariest thing I've ever seen, as I still can't find the words to explain it. I've had a few people tell me that it was just my dog being dumb, while others say it was something paranormal related. All of these theories were valid, but unfortunately, the second one seems more plausible. I'm not sure what exactly happened, but what I do know is that my dog obviously saw something in that room that I couldn't see, that terrified her.
I used to work at a video store in Los Angeles in the 90s. We had quite a few celebrity customers, even a few porn stars too. It was a wacky work environment that could feel pretty unsafe at times, but that unpredictability was half of the allure. I honestly loved the job and the crazy unhinged customers that came with it. There was a porn star that would come in frequently, I'll call her T, whose visits I would absolutely dread. She only seemed to come in when I was working alone. She would always ask me the same question: which of my movies do you carry? Now, she didn't ask this in any kind of unreasonable manner. T was a little older, clearly had a whole career behind her. She looked and acted a little crazy, like she was out of her mind, but she was also very obviously high. She'd come in jawing, grinding her teeth together, and her eyes would bulge out of her head like they were some prosthetic special effect. She was skinny from years of substance abuse, probably various personal issues with weight and image. T also reeked of booze and cigarettes most of the time. She would scream, "Which of my movies do you carry?" over and over again with that crackhead energy. I repeatedly told her over and over, our computer system would only look up movies by title, not by actors or actresses. But this fact never seemed to get through to her. Every time she would start screaming at me. Remember, this is 1995, so the computer I used to look up things and check rentals was a dinosaur. But it didn't really matter because T would always forget. "How in the hell can you find out which of my movies you have then?" she would scream. I offered to walk her back to the adult section. She could see the stock shelves for herself, but she would always scoff, as if totally disgusted at that idea. This is where it gets bewildering, because she's a porn star who's already come into the adult film store. "I'm not going in there," she yells. "Lady, you're already in here. What's it gonna hurt to go scan the shelves real quick?" In my head, I'm thinking she's a porn star and she won't walk the aisles and look at the covers. It made me think she was even crazier than she was leading on. What'd she think she'd find in there? Just how out of touch with reality was this woman? Anyway, she would yell at me for a bit before calming down and then leaving. But this scene played out at least a dozen times. She wasn't the worst customer I had, but she came to be the one that I dreaded the most. But then one week she didn't show up. Monday, Tuesday, the whole week went by and still no T. It was a huge relief, but part of me wondered, did something bad happen to her? Was she getting extra spun out and would come in even more crazy? The reasonable side of me figured that she'd OD'd. When another week went by without her presence, she left my mind entirely. Fast forward a month or so, guess who comes slithering through the double doors? It's T, and she looks like hell. First off, she clearly hasn't showered for several weeks, maybe since the last time that I saw her. You could always tell when she was really unwashed because her hair would just get more and more vertical. I don't know how else to explain it, other than the grease would just hold up this overly dyed, frazzled hair. Her clothes are about the same as always, nightwear and half-sporty valley mom. All of this is nothing when I see her face though. She has a huge black eye, and her eyes themselves are just completely insane. She's got pupils like dinner plates, and the outer rim, instead of white, is tinged with a deep yellow. I can't tell if she is sick or more hungover than any human I've ever seen. She comes to the counter and sparks up that same shtick she always does. What movies do you have? Where are they? How many copies? I try to be a little personable and say, hey T, it's been a while since I've seen you. We still don't have an updated system that allows me to search for those specifics. I can show you the shelves that might help you though. I'll never forget the look she gave me. Just this faraway nod, half smile with her mouth all jittery. She asked me if I was sure, to which I said yes. Then she started backing up towards the exit. Unsure of what was going on, I figured she was in the middle of an episode, would see herself out, probably disappear for another few weeks. I'd heard of mentally ill people being stuck in loops of behavior. Maybe visiting the video store was part of her loop. Boy, how wrong was I though. The door opens not 30 seconds later, and a big, tall, sharp-dressed guy strolls in. I extend a welcome, but hesitate. This guy looks pissed. He's storming right up to the counter. I ask if there's anything I can help him with. He sets his hands on the countertop and they are blinding, studded with all kinds of gold and silver, crusted diamonds in between them. He calmly explains that I'm the problem and that he's here as a solution. Huh? I start to come back with something about how I'm just at work, just an employee here. If he wants the cash in the register or the pornos in the back, he can have them. The guy laughs at me, shakes his head, then explains that I've just upset his friend who was just in here. Oh, you've got to be kidding me. T, the crazy cracked out porn star who's been pestering me for months, somehow secured backup? I tell him that I don't know her at all. She's just a needy customer who wants to find her films. There's not an easy way for me to do that, so she'll just have to look over the titles herself. This guy cuts me off with a wave of his hand. Says he knows. He's heard every word. He's heard it so many times that he feels like it's happening to him, and now he needs to get involved. It turns out T was pretty much what I pegged her for. This guy was clearly gang or drug related, maybe even a kingpin. He acted like he was T's handler, almost like a pimp or something. She was so old there was no way he had her tricking. I mean, I guess there's a market for anything, but I got more of the vibe that he had a relationship with her and for himself. Whatever the case, it's now my problem. I'm looking up at this Coke machine of a man, deciding if I should hit the security button. This is just a video store, so part of me didn't even think that would work, but it was down at the other end of the counter, and if I moved, this guy was going to snatch me up for sure. He states T's full name, then her stage name. They were similar, probably more similar than you'd want them to be. I realized then that T was probably pretty easy to look up in the phone book, if you were clever enough. He then asked me which movies do you have with her in them. Obviously, he didn't want the same excuses I'd given before, so I threw my hands up in defeat. I logged into the computer beside me, pulled up the inventory list of the entire store, started doing it the old-fashioned way. I jotted down a short list of titles that I recognized and just started from there. It took me almost an hour to find every single tape, constantly double-checking the shelves and discount racks for hidden copies. The whole time, that guy just casually followed me around, not saying a word, just watching me gather them all up in a tub on the counter. He'd crack his knuckles, roll his neck, textbook intimidation stuff. It was like a scene from the Goodfellas. It was only after I started to pile up all the tapes that I realized just how extensive T's career was. She was a mainstream actress for like 20 years from what I could tell, and had been produced by some of the bigger studios throughout the decades. It occurred to me that this crackhead burnout probably still received checks for some of this stuff. Now the guy behind me made sense. As I said, I did it. That was it. I told him it'd take me a minute to ring them all out. He asked what I meant by that. I set a charge for all the films. I explained I couldn't just let 80 or 90 tapes just disappear from our store. The guy picks up the bin of movies with one arm, slides a pistol out of his waistband with the other, looks me up and down, sets the barrel on the counter, then asks me if we're good. I just nod, and with a sigh, tell him to take care. I called my boss after I saw them leave the parking lot, who in turn told me to call the police. Both of them showed up 20 minutes later. The police took a statement, and my boss filed a report of robbery, then fired me right there on the spot. I've thought a lot about that guy, who he was, and why they wanted those movies. I work in retail, and there are only 5 of us that work in the store, including our manager. We are a very, very tight-knit family, so we naturally have each other's backs for anything and everything. Tonight, my coworker and I were minding the store, and he needed to leave early for a dinner reservation with some friends that just got to town, so I covered the last 30 minutes alone. We work in an area that has a prominent homeless population, most of whom are wonderful people. After he left, within a few minutes, a very sketchy character came in that set my hair on end. This guy was about 6.5 feet tall, heavier set, and was generally intimidating. To add to the already scary vibe, he was holding a big gulp and a golf club, nothing else on his person. I'm a shorter, smaller female, so now I'm just on edge. He didn't hesitate to make conversation with me, and it's my job to be friendly and make sales, so I jumped in, hoping I'd learn he was harmless and coming back from a driving range or something, even though there's no golf courses within 20 miles of our workplace. Obviously, since you're reading this, I was terribly wrong. This man still had a hospital bracelet on from his 2-month-long stay in a mental hospital, was very, very interested in me and every aspect of my life. He asked what I was studying, which was psychiatry, and then he was immediately put off, as he'd had a very bad experience. And I mean literally the moment he heard the word, it's like an alarm went off in his head. His whole expression changed completely. My heart does go out to people in this position who are clearly struggling, and it's my life's mission to help people like him. But no matter how much my heart went out to him, I was still very vulnerable. He then asked me the following questions. What's your name? Where do you live? Where do you go to school? When do you work? How often do you work? When is your next break? How old are you? Do you live alone? Is anyone else here? I lied to every single question, and when he demanded my phone number, I gave him the store phone number. I also told him my name was my manager's name, so that if he tried to make contact, he would be directed to someone that is not me. Thankfully, I was able to boot him out at close. Some of my answers were pretty vague, like where I lived, and that seemed to upset him a bit. Still, he left without much issue. When I left, I had changed my clothes and my hair to be a little less recognizable, and thank goodness that I did that, because he was waiting in the alley out back. I did my best not to notice and make it obvious, but I beelined for my car, which was in a parking lot across the street. This, unfortunately, gave him a bit of time, and he soon came wandering out of that alley. I didn't turn around. I just played it cool and stared at the crosswalk icon glowing across the street. It changed and I proceeded, just as I heard this guy sprinting up behind me. It's late. There's no one else around. I know what's about to happen. He's gonna hit me in the head or in the knee or whatever, and then drag me into that alley. My nerves break, and I finally turn back. He was standing at the edge of the sidewalk, just staring at me. Once I turn, he can see my face. He grumbles something, and then keeps following. Shit, I gave myself up now. Now he knows it's me. He even starts hollering the fake name that I gave him. I didn't respond, just picked up the pace and hustled to my car. I figured as long as I could get inside, I could probably get myself out of here. Still, I hear his shoes scuffling the asphalt, gaining on me. When I think he must literally be right behind me, I want to turn around and look, but instead, I just break into a full-on sprint. I can hear his steps stop a little and then hesitate. My outburst to get away must have caught him off guard. Just as I reached the door inside the key in, I turned back one last time. I don't see the man, but His hand, fingers wrapped around the handle of the golf club. It's so close that I can read some of the print on the hospital band that's hanging from his wrist. I was so terrified and reeling with shock that my knees buckled. My legs totally gave out from underneath me. As they did, the golf club went whistling overhead. It was all that prevented me from getting my brains bashed in. Not instincts, not training, just sheer terror. Fortunately, I fell backward, right into the driver's seat of my car. I yanked the door closed, locked it, then sped out of there like I stole the damn thing. I called the police and then my manager. The guy was picked up and booked that night. I even had to identify him at the station. Always, always trust your gut out there, people. I work in retail. Receiving shipments for our location is one of the things that I do for my job. Since I do the paperwork for it, I have to interact with the truck drivers who also bring the shipments in. It's a task-driven job and requires a lot of organization, but also demands a pleasant personality because of all the interaction time with the drivers. Most of them are older men in their 40s to 60. I'm a woman in her mid-20s. This is relevant. Most of the drivers are great, helpful, and professional. But there was this one who was oddly talkative all the time. Nothing really weird, but sometimes irrelevant or mildly inappropriate conversation topics, like stuff he did back in college, his ex-girlfriends. You get the picture. I just figured he was outgoing and a bit quirky, so I was friendly with him, like I am to everyone. Until a coworker, a guy who also works in receiving, but in a different department, told me that he only ever hears this driver talking to or about me. Apparently when I'm not in the room or in earshot, then he's silent or talking about me, asking where I am. Then a completely different coworker said he overheard this guy referring to me as his wife when I wasn't there. So after hearing all this weird shit, I become less bubbly around him, kept the conversation strictly to business. If he ever said anything about his personal life, I would just ignore it and then went about filing the paperwork. I wasn't rude to him or disrespectful, just simply stopped going out of my way to engage him in conversation. There was one time he got a little too friendly in the clerk's office, and my reaction was pretty knee-jerk. I couldn't help myself. I felt cornered because he was really laying in on the lovey-dovey stuff, right in front of other people. It was the strangest, most direct form of gaslighting I've ever seen. As if I just slide right up underneath him, like we've been dating for years. He made a comment, and I spun around and told him, and the innocent bystander clerk, that we were in no way involved, and our communication would be strictly professional from there on out. That was when he turned on me. Everything he said was an attack on my personality. They must be working you too hard. You're far less fun to be around than you used to. You used to be a happy person. I love my job. I'm very happy here. I just don't like being creeped on by old men. Eventually, he went as far to telling other people that I was unprofessional, basically a bitch, just straight up gossiping about me behind my back. And that was when I confided in my boss about how uncomfortable this guy was really making me. I actually pride myself on my outgoing nature. I'm bubbly by default. And the fact that he was causing me to have to change my personality around him, and then telling others that I was cold-hearted, simply just for keeping my distance. That was the line I drew. My boss filed a report. Everything died down after that, at least for a little while. My coworkers would still overhear something every now and again, but it seemed this old-timer was keen to who was on my side. I figured it was water under the bridge at that point, and we just let bygones be bygones. That was until the phone calls. Every day for 3 or 4 weeks. My phone would start blowing up at random times throughout the day at work, at home, and even in the middle of the night. I thought it was spam, but no one ever said anything. The number came up as unknown, so I didn't even know how to block them. Part of me had a suspicion that it had something to do with that old guy. During some of his good old day stories, he'd mistakenly copped to doing stuff exactly like this. Prank phone calls, leaving stuff on people's porches and cars, whatever. He got a kick out of messing with people he deemed to have wronged him. I started keeping tabs at work, asking my friends in other departments to keep their ears open for anything, especially anything the old guy thought was funny. I keyed them into my situation, and that if he talked to anyone about what he was doing, it'd be in a braggadocious way, and he'd be proud about it. Nothing came through the grapevine though, but every day my phone continued to ring. Some days, especially if I was at work, I just turned it off, dump it into my purse to get a little peace of mind. The more I thought about it, the more it made sense. Of course this sour old man had the time to mess with me. He drove a truck for a living. He was probably on the phone 18 hours a day. With renewed confidence, I let the calls roll off my back. I'd answer them and call the guy by name, tell him what I thought about him, then hang up. Even at work, I'd look him right in the eye, shake my phone at him, like we were long-lost pen pals. I could see it was getting underneath his skin. One night on the weekend, I woke up to my phone light. It wasn't buzzing, just the constant on and off screen. It was enough to get me. It's an unknown caller. I roll over and answer it. As I get ready to let out a string of vulgarity fly out of my mouth, I hear a loud honk outside my house, and I can also hear it through the phone. Now I'm legitimately creeped out. I get up and peek through the curtains to see this guy's truck in the middle of the street, the same truck he used for work. He hung up on me the second he saw the curtains part, then roared off into the dark. No more honks, no turnaround. I didn't know what to think. First my phone and now my house. How the hell did he learn any of this information? I didn't go to sleep that night, but started putting together as many puzzle pieces as I could. By the end of the weekend, I'd constructed a pretty solid case against this asshole. I took it straight to my boss on Monday morning. I gathered that he must have been stealing my personal information from the files at work. This was the second time I was in his office about this particular guy, so I'd already created a paper trail. When I brought the new stuff against this clown, my boss was floored. He couldn't believe it. He went on to file a second report, but this time he made a direct announcement to the entire company and other companies that we were working with. It was the start of a chain that exposed a lot of scummy weirdos harassing the office girls.
This happened about 1 year ago. I'm a 20-year-old female, and I'd gotten a new retail job at a clothing store. It was my first week, and I had went through training with my coworkers on how to work the sales floor and the register. It was a fairly busy night, and I was placed in the home/accessory department. I was halfway through my department when I had spotted a weird man looking at me. He then says to me, "Hey, can I ask you a question?" And I thought he was going to ask me about a store item. Well, I was wrong. He then asked me in a condescending tone while laughing, "Well, are you even old enough to be working here? I didn't know they hired 13 to 14-year-olds. I looked at him awkwardly and then responded back with, "Yes, sir, I'm old enough to be working here." I knew that he wanted to know my age by the tone of his voice. Then he looks at my name tag. I'll be using a fake name for privacy reasons, but my name is pretty unique. But then he says, "Faith? Is that even a real name?" I just laugh awkwardly and say yes that it is, and just continue working in my department. I get to where the pillow department is, and as I'm fixing the pillows, he's yet again behind me and then says, "Oh, what do you know? It's you again." And he then grabs a pillow, fluffing it, and then asks, "Are there any pillows here that are bigger? You see, I have a big bed and a big house, and these pillows are just way too small for me." I just looked at him kind of awkwardly, not knowing what to say, and tell him, "Well, this is all we have, sir. I'm really sorry if it's not to your liking." As I'm getting towards the end of my department, I get called up to cover my coworker's register, and when I call up the next customer, it's the creep again. He's just looking at me up and down, and I'm ringing up his items as quickly as possible, trying not to talk to him. He then says to me in a creepy tone, "You know, I'm a smell kind of guy. I like smells." And no joke, he makes a loud sniffing sound in the process, then You smell so damn good right now." I just looked at him in shock, not knowing how to handle this weird situation. I just told him thank you and to have a good night, and that I have other customers waiting. He flashed me a creepy smile, then telling me, "I'll be seeing you again very soon." That's about all that happened, and luckily I didn't see him again. But damn, what a creepy ass guy and experience. Even thinking about it gives me the shivers.
A long time ago, during the pre-internet era, I worked in a local pizza place. I was only 17 at the time. It was a nice operation. The staff and management got along well. Try saying that with a straight face nowadays. One of our servers was a lovely young woman. We'll call her Brittany, who was very much a free spirit. She didn't own a car and would walk to work and would get rides home from other coworkers after her shift ended. She usually worked the late shift and closed up at around 10, usually leaving at about 11 after cleanup. I often gave her a ride home on the nights I didn't bike to work. She would sometimes even hitchhike home if no one could drive her. She was pretty fearless, but always kept pepper spray and a small knife in her purse, just in case. On one busy Friday night, we finished the post-shift cleanup at around midnight. We were the only two left at the very end aside from the owner, who was in the office counting the cash drawers and cataloging the sales receipts. Remember, this was before computers, so this had to be done with an adding machine and pencils. I rode my bicycle that day, as it was really nice outside for the first time in weeks. The owner said that she would give Brittany a ride if she waited until the accounting was done. It would be about another hour or so. She decided not to wait and said that she would just hitch a ride home. We both tried to discourage her from doing that, and I told her that she might not even get a lift in an hour anyways. But she just laughed and said, "Hey, I'm a nice-looking girl with great legs. Somebody's going to stop, and I have myself a defense kit." Honestly, I don't think her penknife would have even cut an apple, but it was something, and the pepper spray she used would at least be effective. I walked her outside, and we talked for a while in the parking lot. She joked about sitting on the handlebars of my bike and saying that I could bike her home. Of course, that wasn't an option. So we both laughed. I offered to stay with her until she got a ride. But she said no thanks, and that no one would stop if they saw her with a guy on a bicycle, and that it would have made them suspicious that we were up to something. So we said our goodbyes and headed off in separate directions. She didn't report to work on her next scheduled day, which was the following Monday. This was highly unusual. She was never late for work, or missed a shift without calling. A couple of days later, her mom came in, frantically asking if her daughter had been to work. She hadn't come home or called since Friday night. If she was coming home late or staying at some place, she would always call her mother. We were all freaked out a little bit. Her mother eventually reported her missing, and the police came around and questioned both me and the owner about that Friday night. The owner, being a middle-aged woman and me being a goofy 17-year-old kid, didn't interest them much as potential suspects or even persons of interest. After the police left, the teasing started. Restaurant workers can be a hard bunch, especially the kitchen staff, and most have a very dark sense of humor, at least the ones that I worked with. This went on for the next few shifts, and things didn't help when it became evident that I was the last person to ever see her alive. The cops came back into the pizza place and questioned me again, and also my parents, which of course freaked them out. Finally, about a week after she went missing, a coworker was really giving me hell about it, telling the waitresses not to get too close to me or they might disappear. I finally had enough of his underhanded remarks. After he sarcastically asked me where I hid the body, I snapped back. "At the bottom of the f***ing lake. You want to join her?" Of course, everyone who overheard this went, "Ooh," and egged us both on. Being 17 and stupid, I said, "Yeah, I put her on the handlebars, rode out to the dam, and threw her off. Now shut up and leave me alone." That quieted everyone down. He ended up calling me a few names, and we eventually returned to our duties. Well, Brittany's body turned up in the reservoir. She had been sexually assaulted and stabbed to death. There was a reason her body wasn't discovered sooner, but I can no longer recall why. Needless to say, the cops got a whole lot more interested in me now, after that sarcastic tirade at the restaurant, where I unknowingly foretold almost the exact way her body was discovered. They had my parents bring me into the station, and I was questioned again, without an attorney present. Back then, unless an arrest was imminent, a juvenile could be questioned without one as long as a parent was there. As the dam was a good 20-mile drive from the restaurant, I was eliminated as a suspect. They made an arrest a short time after that. It was a man they had suspected in a similar incident the previous year. He confessed to both murders in exchange for a life sentence. Obviously, there was no connection between me and him, but I still felt awful. When I went to Brittany's memorial, I just sat in the back quietly. By that point, word had gotten around about my morbid joke that turned out to be true. I didn't attend the burial service. I didn't want to upset her family. A few years later, I got work at a gas station and had the misfortune of selling an arsonist the fuel he used to set his own house on fire. But that's a story for another time. For context, this took place almost 2 years ago. I was 26 at the time. I was in Washington on sort of a vacation visiting my then fiancée. We'll call her Sarah for the sake of this story. It was for a graduation she was having for basic training. It was a big deal for her family, and she asked me to be there for it. So I said why not, and booked a flight. I would be arriving a week before the rest of her family, so her and I could have some time together, just the two of us, before she would be busy having all of her family there for the occasion. She stayed with me at my hotel during this time, and eventually we decided that we wanted to get out and explore some of the nearby historical sites that Washington has to offer. I had never been there, of course, so the idea piqued my interest. Once we arrived at our location, we spent about 4 hours walking around and seeing all the sites, from the Lincoln Memorial to the Washington Monument, the Congress Building, and even the White House. It was a very fun and exciting experience for myself to see all of these places, as I had missed out going on a school trip in high school to visit them. Sarah at the time seemed to appreciate my interest in them, and we basically enjoyed ourselves. After we finally decided that we had had enough of walking around and were ready to go back to the hotel, we used the Uber app to call for a ride. We had used it before to arrive and had no issues, so we decided just to use it again for the ride back. Sarah made the request on her phone while I sat down under some shade and waited. I was pretty tired from all the walking we had done, and I could feel that I was ready to get back to the hotel for a nice long nap. Eventually, after about 10 minutes of waiting, a car pulled up in front of us. Sarah mentioned to me that this must be our Uber, as the place that they had stopped at was not a parking spot. I stood up and followed her to the car, where she opened the back door and stepped inside, asking the driver, "Hey, you're the Uber, right?" He gave a slight nod to her without saying anything, and I then followed her into the car, shutting the door behind me. Now looking back on this, I realize how dumb we were. We should have been asking for the driver's name and verified it on the app. I didn't have access to any of this myself, as Sarah was the one who had made the request on her phone, so none of these concerns occurred to me at the time. As we both sat in the back seat of the car, which was a gray-colored van, the driver didn't say a word. I found this a bit odd, as any other Uber driver we had had would at least greet me once and confirm my name and the address I was supposed to be driven to. But this guy? Nothing. The vehicle began moving without the driver acknowledging either of us, other than that brief nod he had given to Sarah. I did pick up on how weird it was, but I was tired, and I didn't really feel like trying to engage the man myself. I laid my head back and just closed my eyes. I then felt a tap on my arm from Sarah, after what felt like only 5 minutes into the ride. I opened my eyes and looked at her. She didn't speak to me. I could see the look on her face was one of worry, and it had me wondering what exactly she was concerned about. He then pointed to her phone, which was showing the route the Uber would take to drive us back to our hotel. It didn't take me long to realize that we were heading in the opposite direction. I could see the color in Sarah's face drain shortly after a notification popped up on her phone saying that our Uber had arrived, followed by a message from the driver asking where we were. The picture that popped up on Sarah's phone did not match the driver of the van. My heart sank into the pit of my stomach. I then knew that we had gotten ourselves into a situation I never thought that we would be in. I slowly looked back towards the driver, but I didn't say anything. I didn't know what this man's intentions were, or what he was capable of, and I honestly did not want to find out. I just knew at that moment that I had to get us both out of this van. I leaned forward and told the man that we had changed our minds and would be fine with being let out where we were. This was an attempt to get us out of the situation without alarming the man that we knew. He glanced at me through the rearview mirror, and the first actual acknowledgement of me since we had gotten into the vehicle. I caught his glance as he stared at me without saying a single word in what felt like minutes. It was probably only about 10 seconds. He didn't stop the van, and he didn't say anything in response to me, and just kept driving as if nothing had been said. My patience had run out, and I knew that whatever this man had in store for us wasn't good. I then did the only thing I could think of in that moment and reached into my pocket, pulling out my pocket knife I always carried on me. I flipped out the blade, and without wasting another second, I told the driver, "We know that you're not the Uber. I don't know what your plan is here, but I have a knife, and if you don't pull over right now, I'm going to stick it right in your temple." The driver's eyes quickly looked at me again in the rearview mirror, and I knew he could see me gripping the knife in my hand. He then quickly pulled the van over, and I heard the doors unlock. Sarah and I wasted no time getting out as fast as we could. The moment we were both outside, the man sped off. We quickly took a moment to gather ourselves as Sarah was having a panic attack, and I was still trying to wrap my mind around what the hell just happened. Sarah quickly pulled out her phone and responded to our actual Uber driver and informed him of our location and asked if he wouldn't mind picking us up. The Uber driver arrived a few minutes later, and this time we made sure it was the right one. We told him everything that had happened. He then informed us of something that made the blood in my veins turn to ice. He told us that there had recently been multiple instances where people were posing as Uber drivers in that area, as it was easy to find many tourists around there who wouldn't think twice about getting into a car thinking that it was an Uber or a Lyft. The guy told us that we were very lucky to have gotten out of that. We made it back to the hotel without issue and quickly reported this incident to the local police. We gave the description of the unknown driver and the van he was driving. The police told us that they would call us with any further information, but we never heard back from them, so I'm assuming the man was never caught or found. That worries me because he could still be out there, doing this to somebody else. Again, I realized how stupid we both had been, and how we didn't verify the vehicle before getting into it. But let this be a reminder to everyone listening to do just that, and always make sure you're aware of your surroundings. This story happened in September of 2007. I live in Lyon, France. I was 18 years old when this happened. I was taking a train back to my hometown from the south of France. I had visited my grandparents in the countryside before beginning my first year at university. I left on a Sunday at around 7 p.m. and I got on the inner-city train. Here's a detail that will be important later on. The train was one of those old slam-door trains. This means it was possible to open the door while the train was still moving, no matter how fast it was going. It also seemed like this train didn't have any cameras. Once I got on the train, it was mostly empty. As expected, it didn't have any air conditioning, but I couldn't afford the high-speed train tickets, so I would have to endure. About 30 minutes into the trip, the train made its first stop. 3 shady-looking men boarded the train, and I was instantly creeped out. The 3 of them looked like they had just escaped a mineshaft explosion, and they were staring at me like I was a sirloin steak, the kind that costs more than $100. I decided to go into the next car and use the bathroom, but right after getting out of the bathroom, the 3 men surrounded me. They all had knives. One of them then yelled at me, "Give us all your money or we're throwing your ass off the train." I froze in fear, and out of nowhere, one of them struck me in the back of the head, and then they dragged me to the door of the train. One of them opened the door and tried to kick me out while the train was still moving at high speed. Half of my body was out of the train, and I was trying hard to fight them off and prevent them from pushing me onto the gravel. I was screaming at the top of my lungs. I thought I was going to die. Suddenly the train began to slow down. All 3 of them forced me off the train, and I landed onto some grass next to the tracks. I got up and started running. Once my adrenaline died down, I was processing what just happened. There was definitely something wrong with my leg, something I hadn't felt until that moment. It turns out it was fractured during the fall. A bystander happened to see me being thrown out of the train and called an ambulance for me, and before I knew it, I was in a hospital bed. The police later caught these 3 crazy men, and they were sentenced to 3 years in prison, along with a huge fine. Yeah, I know, 3 years in prison for attempted murder. And this is France. This is just how things go here. But at the end of the day, I'm just glad to be alive. Long-time listener, first-time submitter. I thought I would pick a story from my past. For some reason, it has made a resurgence and has almost become an unwelcomed guest in my mind. Perhaps sharing it will help me get over it once and for all. The year was 1986. I was 16 at the time. I was in Indianapolis at Union Station. It was around Christmas time or just after. I was with my mom, my 2-year-old sister, and my 21-year-old uncle. At this time, my uncle still lived in Indianapolis, while the rest of us lived in southwest Indiana. We were getting ready to leave and drive back home. It was very cold out that day, and I was bundled up in my jacket, scarf, and gloves. My mom, God rest her soul, could talk a dead man back to life, so I was just waiting for her long-winded wrap-up. It was getting hot standing inside Union Station while wearing all that clothing, so I told her, "It's getting too hot in here. I'm gonna step out for a minute. My mom nodded, and I went out. There was no snow or wind, just perfect for me to cool down for a bit. Not even a minute or so of standing outside, right by the double doors, a white Chevrolet pulls up. Two big men with crew cuts were sitting in the driver and passenger seats. They were at least 6'5", and probably about 280 pounds each. I figured they were probably from our local military base, but that was just an assumption. Immediately after seeing me, they stop at the curb, roll down the window, and smile. "Hey, come here. I want to talk to you," the passenger said. Bear in mind that I'm 16. If this were to happen to me today, things would be much different. But as a kid, I was very polite, almost to the point of being docile. I was always very apologetic when I thought I'd screwed up in some way. I looked up and I saw a streetlight above me. I looked back at them and started apologetically stating, "Oh, I'm sorry. This is not what it looks like." At that moment, it was more amusing to me. I hadn't really considered that I was in some kind of danger. They kept reiterating that they just wanted to talk to me, and I kept explaining to them that I'm not a street girl, and this is not what it looked like, and that I was sorry for giving the wrong impression. It didn't occur to me that they weren't listening to a word that I was saying. All of a sudden, the passenger gets out and starts moving toward me like a hungry dog staring at a T-bone steak. A switch went off in my head, and I was no longer apologetic or embarrassed. I was just pissed, and I yelled, "You don't have to get out of your car if you just want to talk to me. I can hear you just fine from here." I suddenly found the 70% Irish and Scandinavian heritage on my dad's side, and it came out in full force. I was proud of myself for having shown some backbone, but there was still a towering, hulking man coming right towards me. I bolted back inside, where my mom was still yammering. Upon seeing me, my mom and uncle were immediately alarmed. They hadn't seen the man get out of his car, but they could tell that I was frightened. I told them what happened, and my uncle asked, "What were they driving?" "A white Chevrolet." My mom then cut in, "Go get him!" My uncle bolted out of the door and down the street, chasing after the Chevrolet. "Get the hell out of the car, so I can bust out your teeth!" My mom was livid, but I could tell that my baby sister was getting upset, so I tried talking her down. My uncle came back in a few minutes later, winded and worn out. When he caught his breath, he said, "I almost caught up with them when they got to that traffic light at the end of the block, but they peeled out right before I got there." Welp, that put a major damper on our trip to Indianapolis. The moral of the story is, ladies and gents, don't allow your good manners to supersede your own safety. Who wants to die being polite?
This is something that happened a few years ago. I buy things on eBay here and there, and have been doing so for years. I like to collect things like sports memorabilia, and occasionally I bid on auctions. One time I saw this autographed football that was signed by one of my favorite players. It had 0 bids, and the starting bid was pretty low. I expected it to go way up, but I entered my maximum bid and then moved on, thinking maybe I had a shot at winning it. The auction still had several days left. Over the next few days, I actually forgot all about it. Then, I got a notification that I had won the auction and I could pay for the signed ball now. When I looked, I couldn't believe it. Not one single other person had bid on the ball, and I had won. I don't remember the exact price. I think it was maybe like $10, and was probably worth a lot more, maybe over $50. I was really excited and paid the money. The very next night, though, I was at home when my phone rang. During this time, I had a landline phone that I had for years. I did not recognize the number on the caller ID, so I didn't answer it. What followed shortly after was a message. A man's voice came onto my answering machine, and he said that he was trying to reach me and mentioned my name. He said that I had won his auction for the football, and unfortunately nobody else bid on it. Then he said that I was getting way too good of a deal, and it wasn't fair at all, but he was going to do me a favor and mail it anyways. He went on to say that he expects me to leave him a very good review after this. Now, this rubbed me the wrong way. I didn't like how he called me up on my personal phone to say this. I won his auction fair and square. If he didn't want the risk of somebody paying $10 for it, then he shouldn't have started the bidding so low. He knew the risks. I went on eBay and looked at some other listings of the same player's autograph on a football. They were going for a little over $50, so the guy lost out on about $40. It's not that big of a deal. Just 2 days later, I received the football in the mail. It was fast shipping because I guess the guy lived in the same state as me. After receiving the football, it was packaged well and just how it looked online. I went on eBay to leave the good review that the seller wanted so badly. To be honest, I really didn't want to leave him a good review after what he did. It kind of annoyed me. But when I logged into eBay, I noticed that he had already left me a negative review. On eBay, sellers and buyers can leave each other reviews. You can leave it positive, negative, or neutral. This affects your feedback, and people are less likely to buy or sell to you if you have a bad rating. Mine had been perfect to that point, and his was pretty good. I think it was like 99% positive. His negative review of me said, "Buyer got way too good of a deal." Clearly, he was upset about it, but I did not feel that it was fair for him to leave me a bad review. What was I supposed to do? I bid and I won. Did he expect me to offer to pay more for no reason? It angered me that he left me a bad review, so I left him a bad review. I said what happened. I said, "I won the auction from this seller for a good deal." He then called my home phone complaining and demanded that I leave him a good review. He sent me a message after this, which I ignored. I didn't even open it. Then, the next day, he called me again. I didn't answer, and he left another message. This one was very angry. He berated me for about 3 minutes straight. I didn't even listen to the whole thing and deleted it, but this didn't stop him. He called me again several times the next day. I got frustrated, and luckily I had call blocker installed on my landline. I blocked his number so that he would finally stop bothering me. For several days, everything was fine. But then, one night, I was at home, and out of nowhere got a knock on my front door. I walked down to the front door, but before opening it, looked outside. It was a man who I did not recognize. I didn't know why he would be here. I answered the door, and the man standing there mentioned my name and asked if that was me. I said yes. He then told me that he sold me a football on eBay not long ago. As soon as I heard that, I slammed the door right in his face. This caused him to start aggressively banging on my door. I yelled at him to go away or I was calling the cops. He was yelling and demanding that I give him the ball back, saying that I scammed him. I couldn't believe this guy. I'm not sure if he was really just mad about the ball at this point, or if he was just mad at me. He kept standing there and knocking on my door every so often. After he didn't leave for over 10 minutes, I called the police on him. When they arrived about 10 minutes after that, the man was still there. They spoke with him, and he gave his side of the story, which I'm not even sure what that was. An officer came inside and spoke to me, and said that the man outside kept claiming that I scammed him and stole his autographed football. I told the officer the whole story, and I showed him eBay proof on my phone. After a while, the police ruled in favor of me. They said that the transaction was fair and I owned the football. They told the man that he had to leave my property and told him not to come back. Eventually, the man agreed and left. After that, I never heard from him again. I still have the football, and every time I look at it, I laugh when I remember the crazy story that goes with it. Several months ago, I sold my PlayStation 5 on eBay. My friend was getting rid of his PS5 for an Xbox, so he sold it to me for a really good price. His PlayStation 5 was a little bit nicer than the version that I had, so I decided to sell mine. I listed it for a good price on eBay as a buy it now rather than an auction. Somebody bought it after just 2 days, and the very next day, I packaged it up really good and shipped it. I sent it to the address that was given from the eBay account that bought it from me. Now, 3 days after I shipped the PlayStation, and 4 days after it was sold, I got a message on eBay from the buyer. He told me that he recently moved and forgot to put his new address on his eBay account. Then he asked me that I ship it to his new address instead. I responded and told him that I already shipped the PlayStation several days ago and that it was too late. The guy freaked out, saying that I should give him a refund because he wasn't going to get it. I told him that he should have realized that, either before he bought it or within the first day. What was I supposed to do? Sit around waiting for his blessing for me to ship it? I mean, normally, people want things shipped as fast as possible after they buy it. He said that he was going to report me to eBay, but that didn't really scare me because I knew I had done nothing wrong. I told the guy that the package will have his name on it, so he should either go to his old address and pick it up, or contact whoever now lives there and ask them to send it to him. In my mind, that was a very logical solution. Obviously, if it was at the wrong address, there was a chance that somebody would steal it, but I mailed it in a box where it wasn't obvious that it was a PS5. The guy did not seem to think my ideas were good. He just told me that he needed a refund, and he kept threatening me, saying that he would have my eBay account banned. I told him that I wasn't going to refund him. Over the next few days, the guy kept harassing me, sending me messages. He kept saying that I had to give him a refund. He really wanted the money, but I wasn't going to give it to him. I just ignored him. So about a week later, I was looking at some of the messages that he sent me, and I decided to look him up, just for the heck of it. His username seemed to be his actual name. It was a first name, an underscore, and then a last name and a bunch of numbers. The last name was somewhat unique sounding, so I thought that I might be able to find him. I wanted to know what this guy looked like that was harassing me so much. I went onto Facebook and entered his name. Just one result came up, and it was a younger looking man. His page was public, so I could see everything that he posted and stuff, and he was quite active. I scrolled down just a little bit and saw a post that nearly blew my mind. He had posted a picture of a PlayStation 5 with the caption, "Just got this bad boy in the mail. Hit me up if you want to play some COD." The PlayStation looked just like the one that I had sold, and it was dated just 3 days after I had mailed the PlayStation, and the very same day that the guy told me that he had the wrong address. This guy was totally trying to scam me. It was a pretty bad attempt too, to be honest. I screenshotted the post and then sent it to him on eBay. The guy claimed that it wasn't him. Then he backtracked and said that it was his friend's PS5, not his. Then he backtracked again and called me a curse word. After that, I never heard from him again. I buy things on eBay all the time. I've bought things from video games to phones and even computers. I've also sold a couple of items as well. This is something that took place just last year. My mom's birthday was coming up, and I wanted to get her a new phone because the one that she was using was old and slow. She uses an iPhone, and I think she had like a 7 or 8 or something. I was looking up newer ones and was trying really hard to find a great deal. I should have just paid a fair price and bought one from one of those companies that refurbish them. That way you know what you're getting and everything is handled professionally. But instead, I got carried away trying to get the best deal. I was constantly scouring the latest listings and auctions. I found one that was a really good deal. It was selling for about $100 less than I would expect to pay for the phone. It was still several $100s though. There were a few pictures of the phone in what appeared to be the person's house. In the listing, the seller said that it worked great, but they had gotten a different phone and no longer needed it. It seemed legit, and I looked at the seller and they didn't have any other items for sale, but did have a 99% rating. When I saw where the seller was located, I noticed that it was in a city very close to me, only like 30 minutes away. That meant it would probably only take like a day or two to ship. I decided to buy it and felt really good with the money that I would be saving. A couple of days later, and the phone arrived in the mail. As soon as I unboxed it though, I realized that I had been scammed. The phone that I received was not even close to what I bought. It was one of those cheap Android phones that you can get for like $40 at Walmart. I really couldn't believe it. I went onto eBay and compared what it said I bought versus what I received. I had gotten scammed badly. I contacted the seller, demanding an explanation. When I did, I got no response. After not hearing back from him, I contacted eBay and reported his profile as well. I now saw that he had another listing of the same phone that I bought. I left a negative review, warning anybody else and telling them what had happened. I hoped that nobody else would fall for his scam. After several days of trying to contact the seller and communicating with eBay, things finally got resolved. I was able to get a refund from my bank, and I was told that the account got suspended as well. I was able to buy my mom an actual iPhone for her birthday. I was still mad about what happened though, but not long after I found out the account had been banned, I think the same night or else the next one. It was late at night, and I was literally in bed about to fall asleep. I was on my phone until I got tired. It was probably a little bit after midnight, and suddenly I heard a loud bang at the back of my house. During that time, I rented a smaller house, which I lived by myself in. I got up from my bed and walked to the doorway. The sound came from the back of my house on the other side. Then I heard it again. It was followed by another bang, which I could hear was from the kitchen window at the back of the house. My bedroom was at the front of the house, so it was a ways away, but I could still hear it very clearly because of how loud it was. Somebody was there. I heard whoever was there start hitting the window repeatedly. I didn't waste any time and went back inside my bedroom and locked the door behind me. Then I got my phone and called the police. I told them that it sounded like somebody was trying to break into my house. Shortly after, I heard glass breaking. They had succeeded in breaking in. I let the police know, and they said that some officers should arrive shortly. Then I heard more loud noises. This time, inside. It sounded like whoever was inside was just destroying things or hitting everything in sight. I heard glass breaking, chairs falling over, and other loud noises. This went on for about a minute straight, and then stopped. Things became very silent after. I heard a little bit of noise coming from the back of the house, as if somebody was walking. Then that stopped too, and everything was completely silent. I remained in my room until the police got there. When I came out of my room, I saw that everything in my kitchen had been all messed up. My back window was smashed, glass was all over the place, and lots of other things were on the floor. Several dishes and cups had been smashed. My table and chairs in the kitchen were all knocked over. Lots of things from the cabinet were on the floor, and I saw several dents in the cabinets and furniture. They basically just trashed my kitchen and left. I told the police everything that I could, and then they left. I stayed with my parents for the rest of the night and the entire next week as well. My window got replaced, and I got some new furniture. I only lived in that house for a few months after, and I don't live there anymore. Since then, everything's been fine, but I never found out who did it. I truly believe that it was the person who scammed me on eBay. I think they were angry that I got their account taken down. If they were running that blatant of a scam, there's no telling what they could do. Plus, they knew my address from shipping me the phone, and I had seen that they lived not very far away from me. Luckily, I don't live there anymore. Hopefully, nobody else gets scammed.
The pandemic forced a lot of people to search for new employments and opportunities, especially during the initial economic onset. Uber Eats, DoorDash, Amazon, all of them saw crazy surges in traffic when cities ordered people to stay indoors. Many places deemed these drivers essential workers, which kept me employed for several unstable months throughout COVID. I became a delivery driver out of necessity back then, but actually still had to do it part-time on the weekends still. My story takes place during 2020, when no one really knew what the future had in store. I was working for a big-name delivery company, one of the largest cities in the United States. At the time, I was constantly behind by at least a day's worth of deliveries, if not more. Strikes are going on. People are ordering more stuff than ever before. It was a lot to handle, and it made a pretty high-stress work environment. One day, I see a meme about how all we do is pee into water bottles and then lose packages. Honestly, it was the golden age for delivery driver memes. Because of how behind I was on my route, I started working overtime pretty much every day. Instead of delivering from 9 to 5, I'd start at 8 in the morning and then just go until I was totally burnt out, which is usually around 7 p.m., maybe a little longer if I had a Red Bull that day. It was one of my last packages for the night, and I remember thinking to myself that it could just wait till morning and be my first delivery the next day. I was really hungry and just wanted to put my feet up. But the destination was nearby. I'm a go-getter, so I just went. And the parcel was no bigger than my fist. It wasn't spending the night in my truck, so I wish I wasn't so stubborn. Why didn't I just go home like I wanted to? The essential worker tag was going to my head. I pull up outside of this apartment complex, and I'm talking chalk line outlines on the sidewalk, caution tape rippling in the breeze. Not literally, but you get what I mean. Groups of guys patrolling the parking lot, milling around the dark corner. Big dogs barking from every tiny gate. Bullet holes in some of the cars. I'm in a big city, and some of the underbelly is seedy, almost unsightly. I scan the package in my hand, and I leave the truck and search the actual address. From what I can see, it seems to be a ground floor resident, and thank God I don't have to climb 10 flights of stairs just to hand off this bulk chapstick, or whatever the hell it is. I locked the truck behind me just to be safe. There's nothing in it to steal, but this neighborhood is just not worth gambling in. After perusing around, I find the building that it's actually in, and then finally the unit. It's a dingy corner apartment with all the windows covered with all kinds of crazy shit. Tin foil, movie posters, food boxes, like cereal, you name it. It's all blocking the light out of this dump. I get a weird feeling the second I see it, but hey, I'm almost out of here. I walk around to the front and find a guy leaning against a tree, smoking a cigarette. I gave him a courtesy nod, to which he offers a 2-finger salute. Standard guy exchange in my city. I turn my heel and approach the front door. I've already decided I don't want to be here anymore, so I hit the bell and place the package on the floor. As I'm standing back up, the door rips open in front of me with this agitated energy. It's every driver's nightmare on shift. The irritated, panicked, where you have to be recipient of whoever wants to jam you up like they're a cop. As I get upright, I can see this is different though. This guy is real thin, half-dressed, and just covered in what I can only assume to be track marks. He's dirty, unwashed, and the living room behind him was disgusting. We make eye contact, I say hello, and then I turn to leave. "What the hell, man? I've been waiting for you all day," he shouts at me. I turn back around and shrug, offer my normal apology. "Hey, we're understaffed, man. What more can I say?" "Well, I think I saw you drop my package, no?" I come to a full stop. I have no idea what this guy is talking about. I point at the one at his feet and asked if he meant that one. "Yeah, man, I watched you throw it against the door. It's probably broken." I start to argue, but the whole thing is a racket. The guy behind me smoking a cigarette is a friend of the guy in the apartment. The guy in the apartment says, "Hey, did you see him do it?" And of course, cigarette guy nods and says, "Yep, I saw the whole thing." Now this is turning into an actual problem. Not just them trying to report me or something, but being surrounded by potentially dangerous criminals. They try to usher me inside the apartment so we can get it all worked out. But I have my own protocol to follow, and right near the top of the list is never get made to go anywhere, especially on shift. The guy in the apartment pulls out a gun right out of his pants pocket, then points it right at my face. The entire conversation stops and we're all just looking at the trigger, waiting. He asked me to reconsider going inside, and that all of this is just a big misunderstanding. The guy with the cigarette puts his smoke out, grabs my elbow, and then leads me inside. My heart is pounding through my chest at this point. Anything could happen. After we get into the living room and they shut the door, all of my suspicions are confirmed. This place is a crack house, without a doubt, and these two clowns are a couple of dealers. Radical, exactly where I want to be. The guy puts the pistol away pretty much the second they got the door locked. He seemed even nervous to have it out, which did come as a relief to me. Not a fan of him waving it around either. The scariest part was actually the door. Once they got me inside, the whole situation devolved into an episode of the Three Stooges. They tried to call my office for 15 minutes. They were so strung out, they couldn't even look at the phone for longer than a minute to actually pull up the number and then hit dial. From what I gathered, these guys have run out of whatever they were actually addicted to and were filling out the cravings with whatever they could get their hands on. To say these guys were high wasn't accurate. They looked like they hadn't slept in days, running on fumes of whatever dust was left at the bottom of the bag. That's when they came up with the scam that they were trying to pull. Like everyone else, they'd seen dozens of videos online of careless drivers dumping packages over fences and things like that. So they ordered something small and cheap off of Amazon, then painstakingly waited at the door for it to arrive, just to peg a fake crime on an innocent, unsuspecting driver. I wondered how long that guy had been leaning up against the tree, waiting for me to show up. They were completely crazy. It was actually kind of entertaining. They thought they were going to get a payout of some kind, right in the middle of the night. Like us delivery guys carry a little fallback cash just in case we break something. I couldn't quite understand the logic, but I appreciate the desperation. I encouraged them just a little, just to see how far they'd actually go, how much more they'd come up with to justify all this craziness. Trying to get them to just focus on the phone was the funniest part though. I had to keep it within reason. These guys did force me in here. They did have a gun, so it wasn't all fun and games or anything. Something got their attention in the back of the apartment. Both of their heads snapped and they reacted to something that I couldn't see or hear. I'm assuming it was just typical hallucinations from staying awake for so long. Either way, they both thought that they could hear someone breaking in and sneaking around the back bedroom. One of them is turning the drawers in the kitchen upside down looking for a flashlight. The other guy's just yelling, keeping an eye on the dark hall in front of him. They don't find a flashlight, but they're both holding cell phones, and this seems to be kind of my chance, so I tell them both of their phones have a flashlight. They just have to turn it on. They both go mental at this realization and frantically flick their lights on. They tell me to keep an eye on the front door and watch their backs. I nod like we're old war buddies, and I'd never let them down. As they went down the hallway and checked the rooms, I slowly shuffled back to the door and unlatched the deadbolt. The last thing I saw was the glare of the cell phone lights against the dingy back wall and the shaky silhouettes of the pistol going from one room to the other. Absolute chaos. I wasn't out of the woods yet though. I still needed to get back to my truck in this sketchy complex and then navigate my way out of the slums and back into the city. It was much later than I thought, and all I wanted to do was just get home. I went from a walk to a light jog as to not draw too much attention. Everything was going smoothly until I reached the parking lot when I hear something behind me. I still don't know exactly what I heard, but it sounded like someone running up on me. So I whirled around and there's no one there. All right, now I'm hearing things. As I turn to face back into the parking lot, I rotate just in time and step into the angled antenna of one of the car that's nearest to me. It had been bent at the base, so it just jutted out instead of going straight up and down. That antenna was also perfectly level with my eye, and it pushed right beneath the lid and then right behind my actual eye. I harpooned my own face in a mad dash to get the hell out of this place. There was no grace in that reaction. In a panic, I flailed backward to get away from whatever was causing the pain, only to injure myself worse. That antenna had a little bead on the end, which I could feel putting pressure between my eye. That metal rod must have been inside my eye at least an inch or two. When I pulled myself backwards, all of it slid out the same way it went in, and the pain was beyond all measure. Droplets of blood are now leaking from the base of my eye. I was stuck within 15 feet of the security of my delivery truck, but I can't see the keys to open up the door. I stumbled to the back and sat on the bumper, just holding my eye and praying that it didn't fall out. After around 45 minutes, my vision cleared up a little, but the pain was still explosive. I managed to get back into the truck and then slowly drive back toward my house, as we didn't have to return them if we were behind. We just swap it out for a totally new, fully loaded truck in the morning. My eye thankfully didn't fall out, but I did require some pretty involved visits to the doctor for around 18 months after that. I like to think that those crackheads are still holed up in that apartment, looking for a phantom burglar. They probably don't even remember taking me hostage. When I was 19 years old, I still lived at home with my parents and little brother. They were going out of town for some weekend getaway trip, but I was at the angsty stage where I only wanted to do my own thing, even if that meant foregoing a legitimate good time. The truth was that I was incredibly hungover. I was early on in my drinking career and had a long night of boozing the night before. I felt so sick that all I wanted to do was lay down and just be alone. I definitely didn't have the stomach to be with my family for 72 hours straight. I coughed up some excuse and they left me behind. You might ask yourself what I had planned for this epic little weekend. No house parties, no spin the bottle, no drugs or music. The first thing I did was cut all my hair. This was around the time Britney Spears shaved her head. It was on every news station in America. I low-key thought it was kind of badass to just go against what everyone thought about you. I was getting ready to ship off to college at the time, so the notion of a self-reinvention was very exciting. Chopping off my hair seemed to be the quickest, most convenient route of rebellion. After the impromptu haircut, I went to the bathroom for a mini spa afternoon. Face masks, moisturizers, and I even cranked up the shower to make it all steamy. After an hour of lounging in the bathroom and getting all the hair cleaned up, I stepped out into the hallway naked as the day I was born. Moving naked through the house is a prized pastime for many homebodies, and I was no exception. I went into the kitchen to find a snack. and just kind of zoned out as I looked out the window. I glanced down to the bag I'm eating out of, and I see a note on the counter. That's weird, I think. I don't remember my parents leaving me a note. At first glance, I recognize right away that it's not any handwriting I know. It reads, "I was going to leave you a letter, but I see that you're still here." My blood runs cold. Still here? Who the hell wrote this? I can feel the water dripping down my back, reminding me of just how vulnerable I am. It's the middle of the day, and still, I'm worse off than a sitting duck. There's a creak down the hallway. I make the split decision and barrel towards my bedroom. Can't do anything without clothes. I'd rather get murdered than run onto the street naked. There's someone standing there, though. I enter the room and find a man. Tall, dark clothing, with greasy hair hanging in his face. The moment I step into the room, he cracks this broad smile, and it's the creepiest thing I've ever seen. The only thing I can do is scream bloody murder right at the top of my lungs. His smile fades and he takes a step towards me, almost apologetically. That's when I recognize him. This weird guy that I dated my freshman year. We were an item for about 3 weeks before he ran away from home, and I mean ran away. No one saw or heard from him for months. The actual local myth was that he'd been found one city over and was homeschooled now. Regardless, here he stood, grinning in my bedroom. He reached behind himself, grabbed my clothes off the bed, and then hands them to me. I proceeded to dress myself in the most awkward situation I can possibly imagine. He didn't even act like he was doing anything wrong, which was creepy, but also a comfort, kind of like a little kid or something. He makes me sit down on the bed after I get dressed. Honestly, he didn't do anything weird or violent. He didn't threaten or hurt me, other than breaking into my house. He heard I was moving away and wanted to see me before I left. He said he'd been thinking about the past a lot, and that freshman year was his favorite. We didn't date long, but it held a special memory for him. We talked for a couple of hours and then he left. I never saw him again, but I did hear a couple of years later that he was fully institutionalized for schizophrenia. That definitely added up when everything was said and done, but made me feel a little uneasy after the fact. How long was he in my house without me knowing that day? And worse than that, could he have possibly hurt me? Lock your doors when you decide to stay home alone. I live in a small country where things still go bump in the night, and that doesn't go for just creepy local legends. Dark strangers, cartels, I think you get the idea. Where I live, nowhere is truly removed from the day-to-day dangers of the unknown. It was a dark night. I found myself home alone. Here, it isn't uncommon for the entire family to live together. Grandparents, parents, children, grandchildren will all share a growing piece of property for wealth and security. It's the simplest way to live. But as you can imagine, being home alone is a rarity. With so many people under one roof, it's almost impossible to time anything just right to ever be actually alone. So I did what I always do. I hooked up the surround sound throughout the living room and turned out all the lights. I bundled up on the couch with my favorite snack and watched whatever I desired on the big family television. Despite the ever-present danger I mentioned earlier, I remember that evening being quite relaxing. Rain and a breeze moved in along the coast and created a pitter-patter against the roof. As the night went on, I thought I heard someone at the front door. As I moved to investigate, the sound and movement stopped. But being a stormy night, and that I had the sound up so loud, I truly in my heart believed I'd simply heard something that wasn't there. I turned back to the movie and did my best to relax. That's when the back door began to rattle. I adjust myself on the sofa to get a better look, when someone starts to knock, a frantic, heavy banging against the hard wood. I froze in place. Whatever I dismissed as storm sounds, or maybe just the junk blowing around in the backyard, is now undeniable. There's someone trying to come inside the house. Everyone who lives there naturally has a key. Whoever is outside the door clearly does not. At the time, I'm an 18-year-old man. I'm running through the logical scenarios in my head. Whoever this is, they tried to open up the front door, then slip around the side of the house and is now trying to force the back door open. This isn't cartel or a monster. Anything with real bloodlust would have forced the front door open. I reasoned that it's a common thief, probably someone very nervous and trying to remain unseen. Being 18, I decided to take them head on and show the world this asshole picked the wrong house. I moved from the couch to the kitchen, grabbed the biggest cleaver I can find. 10 inches of dingy, ugly steel. Still, the door handle is twisting back and forth. Go time. I have no idea what's going to happen, but I'm down for whatever. There's nothing like the mentality of a teenager. You don't know who you're messing with, I shouted through the door. The stranger on the other side stopped shaking the handle for a moment. I know you're out there. You have 3 seconds to get the f out of here, or I'll cut you up. They didn't care. The knocking started again, even harder than before. My confidence quickly faded. I took a deep breath and readied myself. In my head, this was do or die. Hoisting the cleaver over my head, I unfastened the bolt and threw open the door before me. It wasn't a burglar or a gangster of any kind. It was my sweet little grandma. She stood there soaking wet with an expression of agitation, but also unmistakable terror. "What are you doing?" she shouted at me. "Me? What are you doing at the back door?" I asked. "I thought you were an intruder." No. She laughed as she stepped inside the house. I went and paused the television while she shed her coats by the door. She explained that she'd gotten home during the storm, tried knocking for a while. That was the noise I heard at the front door. I guess she knocked for quite a while because she finally gave up and decided to try the back door. The front entrance has a little cover, so she figured that even if it were locked, at least she would be out of the rain. That's when I started to hear the commotion and decided to go to war with whatever was outside. Glad I didn't though, because I seriously almost killed my grandma. I played softball throughout high school. This meant I got home an hour or two later than school actually let out. Regardless, I was still the first one home more often than not. My parents worked well into the afternoon, and my sister participated in various clubs and after-school events like theater club. I got home one day to the usual scene. Fully locked house. Lights are off. Note from my mom in the kitchen. I let my dog out in the backyard, changed out of my uniform, and opened up a bag of Cheetos. Very average, very typical day. My dog scratched to let me know he was bored and to let him inside. Dog and I cuddle on the couch and start watching our favorite shows. Out of nowhere, I hear a door slam open. It's beneath me, downstairs in the basement. I could feel it vibrate through the floorboards. I know this sounds weird, but this wasn't out of the ordinary. The basement was like a downstairs apartment, and my older sister lived down there. The basement had its own entry door to the outside, and she could be pretty careless with her coming and going. Our parents had spoken to her multiple times about letting the door slam open and closed. So honestly, I didn't think twice about it. I kept watching TV and eating my Cheetos. My dog, however, got up and moseyed down the stairs. Again, this wasn't odd, but what was odd was the silence that followed. No smooching or petting, no excited cheers. The dog went downstairs and that was that. Still, I continued watching TV. Maybe she was just in a bad mood down there. After a few minutes, I see movement in the front yard. I turn to find my dog, the one that was just with me on the couch, running up and down the block. He's a big, dumb, and overly friendly Labrador who is not allowed out front. My sister definitely knows this, so I'm thinking, what the hell is she doing? I get off the couch and go down to the basement stairwell. The lights are off. It's eerily quiet. I'm starting to feel all the things that are out of place, the peculiar things that I should have noticed earlier. I reach the basement landing and see the door wide open to the outside world. There's mud tracked in a few steps, and a boot print placed squarely in the center of the door. As I near, I could tell somebody kicked that ground level door in for whatever reason. Robbery, rape, murder, the list really only gets worse. Once they heard the television upstairs and the dog coming down to check the bottom floor, they must have gone back out the way they came and left the door wide open. I told everyone what happened when they got home. They searched the house and the property, but nothing turned up. so my parents got a security system a few weeks later. That was the only reason I ever felt safe inside that house ever again. I live in a pretty rural area outside of your average middle America town. It was my night off and I decided to just hang around the house myself. I got some things done around the yard, did a little self-care, and then settled in with dinner and a movie for the evening. I like to be low energy every now and again, but still I have the tendencies of a night owl. The movie turned into a TV show, and soon it was well past midnight. I hunkered down with my phone and a blanket and let the night really begin. Just as I'm zoning out, someone starts pounding on my front door. Not a knock, but a full force blow against the wood. I freeze for a moment, but then I make the easy assumption it's my boyfriend coming over for a spontaneous booty call. This was common behavior for him and one of the reasons I did like staying up late. I barely had to stand up from the couch to be able to see through the small glass window in the front door. Now, I really do freeze. My heart is the only thing I can feel in motion, steadily slamming up my throat. Staring back at me through the pain was not my boyfriend, but an older, bearded stranger. It was the most unfamiliar face I'd ever seen. This little window in the door was weird because if you were up close and trying to look through it, the prismatic glass skewed the optics, made it impossible to know what you were looking at. You had to have some distance between yourself and the window, like I had right now, to make out what was actually on the other side. This guy was looking at me, but I knew he couldn't actually see me. I snuck back down the hallway and hid in the doorway of my bedroom. I was scared, but I would have been way more scared if I didn't have an eye on him. I couldn't imagine how I'd feel if I turned my back for 1 second and lost track of him. Remember when I said I live rural? Well, I also live in a cellular dead zone. I didn't even bother to find the damn thing. Instead, I stepped to my bedside and fished the landline from my end table. I hit the dial button and brung the receiver to my ear. It's completely dead in my hand. The guy hammers on the door, this time screaming at the top of his lungs. "Let me in!" He slurs. My blood runs cold. This is now worse than a horror movie. I start running through what few options are available to me. No phone, no way to get to the car, no one coming to get me. I have to stay inside where it's safe. That's the only thing that makes sense. First, I sneak into the kitchen, slide the chef knife out of the block. It's the only weapon in the whole house. Next, I slink into the bathroom across from my bedroom and lock the door. It's just a weak little handle lock, but it's enough to buy me some time if he actually breaks through the front door. For some reason, the idea of keeping the high ground was pulsing through my mind. It was literally all I could think about, where I barricaded myself in the bathroom. So, I climbed up onto the countertop and crouched above the door. If he broke in, I'd be able to jump on his back and stab him in the neck and shoulders. I was terrified of the whole thing, but I do have to admit, I was very pleased with my whole little assault strategy. In my head, it made the most sense. With a knife in hand, all I had to do was sink it home. Time went by. That guy just keeps yelling, "Hey, let me in!" Now he was moving around the house. I could hear his hand dragging along the siding as he walked from end to end. He checked each and every window, yanking on the frame, pushing on the glass. Thankfully, I kept them all locked, as well as both doors. I could hear his frustration, and he took to wailing on the walls again, demanding I let him inside. Something occurred to me. That handset I fished out from my bedside table was dead. This psycho didn't cut the line. I just didn't charge the phone. There was a second one down the hall in the kitchen. Nervously, I climbed down from my perch on the countertop and waited until I heard the guy on the opposite side of the house. I unlocked the door and bolted for the phone, which was exactly where I thought it'd be, sitting in the cradle by the back door. I snagged it and retreated back to the bathroom. I called 911, and they dispatched a few officers, but were totally transparent when they told me it'd take at least 15 minutes for them to get there. I was on my own and needed to stay frosty until they arrived. I stayed on the line until the cops arrived. They could hear the guy pulling and kicking at the doors, screaming for me to open it. The longest 15 minutes of my life. When they arrived, they apprehended the man immediately. Dispatch confirmed that I could exit the house, where I stepped out to find a whole team of cops standing around one dirty, scruffy, drunk off his ass hippie-looking kid. He was cuffed, sitting on the ground, totally confused about the situation. He clearly wasn't a murderer. There was a party down the road. This kid stumbled off to take a piss or something, got lost in the dark, and thought my house was the spot. He convinced himself that everyone had locked the doors and was hiding somewhere. It turned out to be a big misunderstanding, but still, it was absolutely terrifying. To this day, nothing compares to what I felt that night. Remember to keep your phones charged and at the ready.
Years ago, I moved into an older apartment. It was pretty cheap, and the building only had 8 units in it. There were 4 on the ground floor and 4 up above it, all of them opening up to the outside. It was really all that I could afford, or else there's no way that I would have moved in there. The rent was like $400 a month, and in that location was really cheap. The apartment that I had was on the ground level and at the far end. It had 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a living room, and a kitchen. After moving in, I didn't have a problem with filling up the space with the furniture that I had, and I didn't even have that much stuff. For the first 2 or 3 days, things went fine. I was gone for most of the day at work and back by nighttime. One night, I went to bed at about 10 o'clock, only to be woken up in the middle of the night. Somebody was knocking on my front door. I looked at the clock, and it was midnight. I sat up and turned on the light for my bedroom. Why would anybody be knocking on my door at midnight? I got up out of bed and then walked out into the living room and turned the light on. I could sort of see that there was somebody at the door, but just saw their silhouette. When the light turned on though, they turned and walked away. I didn't get a good look at them at all. I went over to the door and looked out of it, but by now they were gone and I didn't see anything. It was kind of weird, but I decided just to go back to bed. I was able to get back to sleep, and I'm not aware of the person coming back that night. I didn't wake up for the rest of the night. The next day was normal. I got up, went to work, and then came back home. That night, I fell asleep at the usual time of around 10 p.m. But once more, for the second night in a row, I was woken up in the night. This time, though, I wasn't sure what woke me. I didn't hear anybody knocking on the front door or anything. I turned over to go back to sleep, but I really wasn't that tired. I was wide awake, and I had a bad feeling for some reason. I sat up and turned on my bedroom light. Everything seemed fine to me. I decided to get up and go to the bathroom, and then try to fall back asleep. So I got up from my bed and walked over to my bedroom door. The door was closed, and I opened it to my living room and kitchen area. The living room was closest to me, and the kitchen was at the other end. The only light was coming from my bedroom, so it was kind of hard to see anything, but everything appeared to be normal. When I stepped out though, I heard a noise. It was coming from my kitchen and behind the counter in an area that was not visible to me. I stopped where I was and looked over to the counter. Now my heart started beating really fast. I had no idea what that could have been. I said, "Is anybody there?" It was dead silent. I didn't hear any noise at all. I had no idea what to do in this situation. It sure seemed like somebody was in there, but I still was not 100% convinced. My eyes were just locked on the counter area where I had heard the noise. Then, a few seconds later, suddenly somebody appeared. They stood up from behind the counter and immediately started running towards my front door. It was probably like 15 feet away from them. It was still very dark, and I couldn't see them very well, but I was sure that it was my landlord. He made it to the door, opened it up, and then ran out of my apartment. I really couldn't believe it. I ran over to the door and then locked it, then went into my bedroom and called the police. I told them that my landlord was in my apartment in the middle of the night without permission. They came out and talked to me and said that they were going to talk to the landlord next. I went back to bed, and the next day got more information. The landlord admitted to being in my apartment. He also apparently was involved in other illegal activity. As a result, all of us tenants of his building had to move out, and the building went to new ownership. I'm not sure of all the details. All I know is that I had to scramble to find a new place. It was for the best, though, because I would much rather live in an apartment without the landlord entering as he chooses. This is something that happened when I was a kid, about 13 years old. I lived with my parents and 2 older siblings, both sisters. I remember that my father got a new job, and we had to move like an hour away. For me, it was exciting, but also kind of sad to leave our old neighborhood, especially at that age. Our new house I thought was pretty nice. It was in a neighborhood with lots of other houses, but we had a decent-sized front and backyard. We were not rich, but it had 2 floors and a basement. All 4 of the bedrooms were upstairs, and the main floor had a kitchen, dining room, living room, and family room. There were also a couple of bathrooms and closets. We moved in one day with the help of a moving company, and then spent the next couple of days unpacking boxes and stuff. By the following week, we were all moved in, and it was summertime, so luckily I didn't have school. One night during that same week, I stayed up late playing video games. This is something that I did a lot during that time. Everybody else had gone up to bed, and I was by myself on the main floor and in the family room. I really don't remember exactly what time it was, but probably after midnight is what I would guess. As I was sitting on the floor and playing video games looking at the TV screen, I saw something behind it. We had a window which faced the side of our house behind this particular TV. I saw somebody walk past outside, right by the window. I couldn't tell who it was at all, but it really took me by surprise. At first, I was wondering if I really just saw what I thought I did. Our house wasn't that close to the neighbors on that side that it would be the neighbor. I had a bad feeling about it. It seemed as though whoever it was headed into our backyard. I decided to get up and go look out of one of the back windows inside. I carefully went towards the kitchen, which was at the back end of the house. When I did, at first, I didn't see anything. I got up close to the window and looked out into the backyard. Everything seemed normal though. It was pretty dark in the backyard, but I could see most of it. I was wondering who the person was and where they had gone, but I was also glad that I didn't see them back there. After looking out the window for probably like a minute or two, I backed away. Then I headed back into the family room where I was before playing video games. Around the time that I made it back into the room though, I heard a rattling coming from the back door. Somebody was trying to open the back door leading from the backyard to the kitchen. Instantly when I heard it, I sprinted up the stairs. Then I ran all the way to my parents' bedroom. I woke them up and told them that somebody was trying to get in the house. My parents both came downstairs with me. When my dad turned on the light to the backyard, he saw the man running away. I didn't go over there, but I guess the man was by the house near the other back window and no longer at the back door. He ran out of the yard and through another neighbor's backyard before going out of sight. After the guy ran away, my parents stayed up for a bit, but the guy didn't come back. My dad went outside and saw some marks on the back door. I think the man was trying to get in. I went to bed a short time later and the guy never returned. For the rest of the time that we lived there, no more strange things like that happened either. I still wonder who the guy was and why he tried entering our house. For months, I was afraid that somebody else would try to break in. Luckily, nobody did though.